Reading today is from the Gospel reading, the Gospel of Matthew. It's a long one, so I will be reading it. The first thing I want to do is I want to go back to last week's message, and where we considered Jesus' teachings you are the salt and light, here and now, just as you are, right where you are. No excuses. You are salt. You are the light of the world. The very end of that passage, which is unfortunate, the lectionary breaks it at that point, at the end, verse 20. Verse 20 was a verse that I didn't address verse 20. Because Jesus says here, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." And then Jesus goes on to the "you have heard it said" several times, but then I say to you. You have heard it said that you have heard it said that to the people long ago, do not murder, or anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to his brother or sister, "Raka," which was a kind of an offensive word at the time, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he will hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown in prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away, for it is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown in hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better to you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, if anyone divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard it said that to people long ago, do not break your oath, but to keep your oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is God's footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Whew. I'll be honest, being the first Sunday closest to Valentine's Day, I was tempted to preach on love this morning. Love is a nice topic for a sermon. Safe, not too controversial. It gives us warm fuzzies. Just about everyone I know is in favor of love. Who here isn't in favor of love? Raise your hand. That's what I thought. Then, in a rare moment of clarity, insight, honesty, I guess, I realized that what I was really doing was rationalizing and employing a little thing counselors refer to as avoidance. Subconsciously, I did not want to preach on this gospel passage. And then again, maybe it wasn't all that subconscious. I mean, after all, you read the passage, you know the passage. Jesus addresses topics such as murder, anger, making and keeping of oaths, adultery, and divorce. Now, I'm not feeling any warm fuzzies in this passage. But like I said, we have to go back to that, and it goes back to verse 20 in last week's reading, where Jesus said, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think, whoa, what does Jesus mean by that? What does Jesus expect of us when he says that our righteousness is to surpass that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law? Well, once you get to know me, you know that I don't shy away from difficult passages. First, when approaching this passage, let us not confuse Jesus' use of righteousness with self-righteousness, which self-righteousness, rightly so, we do not consider a good thing. It's not a good trait to have. It's not good to be self-righteous. Righteousness for Jesus, on the other hand, has to do with living in a right relationship, first with God, then with our neighbors, and then ultimately with all of creation. It's unfortunate that lectionary did break this passage where it does, because read as a whole, we would read that immediately after verse 20, Jesus uses what is referred to antithetical statements, in which he takes up and interprets anew old accepted teachings based on the law of Moses. He makes sure it makes clear that he's not replacing the older teachings with something new. After all, I said, he just said that he did not come to abolish, but to fulfill the law and the prophets. But he brings a new interpretation, a reclaiming, or a revitalization that focuses on the original intent of the commandments given to Moses. Jesus frames these with his now famous, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." It is through these that we might gain an understanding of what Jesus meant by righteousness surpassing that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law. So Jesus says, "You have heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with another will be subject to judgment." Now everyone's understood that one should not commit murder. The taking of a human life is wrong, and the penalty for that is strict. We can see that in Leviticus 24. Jesus says, however, that even anger and insults directed toward another render one liable to judgment. Even, he says, to the judgment of the hell of fire. And I'm not even going to go into that. I'm not sure what that even means. In other words, though, a judgment beyond what a human judge might be able to mete out. Jesus poses a powerful ethical question next. He says, how can you make a sacrifice on the altar of God while you are harboring anger, malice, or even insulting words in your heart? If this isn't radical enough, Jesus takes it a step further. Even if you do not harbor in your heart something against your brother or sister, if you remember someone that has something against you, you are to reconcile with that person before coming to the altar. Priority is clear. Right relationship with God is predicated upon having a right relationship with your neighbors. Jesus' teaching challenges not only the scribes and Pharisees of his day, but even religious people, even Christians today. Especially those who like to focus exclusively upon their personal relationship with God to the neglect of their relationship with others. As if we could have a relationship with God apart from our relationship with our neighbors. Jesus goes on to say, "You have heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you, anyone who looks at another with lust has already committed adultery in their hearts." The seventh of the Ten Commandments makes it very clear that adultery is a sin. Numbers 5 provided the people of Israel for an elaborate ritual for determining whether a woman, and it was so a woman in that time, had committed adultery. This narrowly defined adultery became a matter of pure sex. There, I've done it now. I've mentioned sin and sex in the same sermon. Oh boy, the airways are going to light up today. But that's what it got down to. They narrowed it down to that, you know. And again, in that time, unfortunately, it was all about the woman. But Jesus changes that. The teaching of Numbers declared that as long as one has not committed a sexual act, one has neither broken the commandment nor in danger of judgment. I mentioned this to make it clear what Jesus is saying here. For Jesus and his followers, this was not sufficient. Jesus tells his disciples that even lust or desire for another is tantamount to committing the act of adultery itself. Lust and desire can linger in the heart, and Jesus is forever inviting us to consider what is really in our hearts. For if our hearts are not clean, then neither will our actions. Then Jesus employs two hyperbolic images concerning the eye and the hand to underscore the threat that an idolatrous desire has on the pursuit of righteousness or a right relationship with God. Let me just say that I do not believe Jesus is advocating literal dismemberment, but he's making a powerful statement by almost overstating it. But in this, the theological question for me is this: what brings wholeness and just relationships? Are wholeness and righteousness accomplished by taking possession of things, including people, that our culture tells us that we should desire, that we need in order to be whole? Or is there another way? Jesus' discussion on divorce continues to focus on the ideal of wholeness and justice in right relationships. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress. Now, as much as we may not like it, not feel comfortable with it, the law of Moses gave man the right to divorce his wife. He did not need to give any substantial reason, only a letter. This gave undue power to the husband and often would leave the woman destitute, without any means of support, if she could not return to the home of her father or her eldest brother. The man who divorced his wife thus forced her into crisis. And in order to survive, she would have to remarry. But if she remarried, both she and whoever married her, according to the law, became an adult. Jesus' teaching, in contrast, both upholds the sanctity of marriage and provided more protection to women from economic abuse by their husbands. This was a radical interpretation, in that it shifted the onus of responsibility from the woman to the man. If he divorces his wife, he causes her to commit adultery. Now, did it go as far as we would like it to have? Perhaps not. But for the first century, this was radical. To be sure, Jesus provides us with strong warnings about the importance of preserving relationships, but his condemnation focuses on those who break their relationships while insisting that they have met the requirements of the law. This seems to me to carry a firm warning to us as well. That we have to be careful not to think ourselves righteous when we avoid breaking the technicalities of the law or commandments on the one hand, while we treat others as objects to be possessed and later disposed of, or leave them in situations of brokenness that render them vulnerable. In a world that constantly invites us to turn people into objects, not just to be taken for granted, but to be consumed, to be exploited, Jesus calls his followers to discover wholeness and righteousness in relationships of equity, mutuality, compassion, mercy, and solidarity. In a word, relationships that manifest the same justice and love that God constantly shows us. And lastly, Jesus said, again you have heard it said, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven or earth or Jerusalem or by your head. Simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. Now this yes and no bit is about more than oaths. It's about a deeper truth. The deeper truth of our lives and the manner of our being. Not truthiness, or an approximation of the truth, or plausible deniability, or the need to know, or any other ancient or modern convolutions we use to circumvent honesty. Our yes should mean yes, not it depends. And no should mean no, not we'll see. It's a matter of integrity or a matter of trust. Is it a matter of integrity, I should say? Is it a matter of integrity or a matter of trust that we feel we have to make oaths? As we say, there was a time when a handshake was as good as an oath taken in court over a stack of Bibles. Integrity and trust both have taken a big hit in our world today. In politics, in business, in the community, in family, and unfortunately, yes, even in the church. Jesus cautions his followers on our use of the holy name of the divine. Don't use God's name like some sort of magical rabbit's foot. In the end, I guess you could say that we are to tell the whole truth. We are to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and leave off the so help me God. Your word should be enough. Jesus claims without needing to use God's name to close the deal. As I said at the beginning, all four of the "you have heard it said" have a common thread of the primary importance of maintaining healthy and holy relationships on the personal level and on the divine level. This, I believe, for Jesus is what he meant by fulfilling the law and the prophets. This is what he meant by living with a surpassing righteousness. In some small way, this might have made it easier to understand these teachings of Jesus. I hope so. I mean, after all, that was my intent this morning. But does it make these teachings any easier to follow? By no means. But then it wasn't supposed to. It challenged the church in Matthew's day, and these words challenge the 21st century church as well. What Jesus goes on to teach in the next section doesn't get any easier, but that'll have to be for another sermon. I would just add, as a reminder, that Jesus also included in his larger teaching this sermon on what we call the Sermon on the Mount, a prayer. A prayer that speaks about forgiveness, seeking, giving, and receiving forgiveness. And every Sunday, we do just this. We also ask for strength and wisdom to not be led into situations where we might be tempted. So you have heard it said.